I met a lot of nice people. It was an experience for me. I was very immature as a kid. I grew late. I went to high school, 10th grade. I was 4'11", and I weighed like 98 pounds. And I went into 10th grade. Now you can imagine what kind of a ball player I was. I barely could hit the ball out of the infield. And by the time I graduated, I was like 5'10". But I was skinny as a rail, like maybe 145 or something like that. Then I went to college, and all of a sudden, boom! I grew 4 inches in a year.
Oh my goodness.
And all of a sudden, I could field and throw 10 times better than I did before. And all of a sudden, everything sort of like was easy. I was able to do everything.
Where did you go to college?
I went to a small school in New Jersey called Rider, R-I-D-E-R, and at the time was very big in business. And I got a scholarship. I went out for baseball as a freshman, and I made the varsity, and coach gave me a scholarship. And I only used it for, I think, 2 years, and when I got the opportunity to go away to the baseball thing with the Dodgers, I took that and quit school. I gave up my scholarship, and it gave up the education, which I could have stayed in and not gone into the Army. But I figured I could beat that. I was stupid. I was just a kid, 19 or 18, 19, I was a kid. And my parents were good to me. Whatever I wanted to do, they let me do, you know. When I signed the baseball contract, my dad didn't even know what the hell that was. I mean, he didn't know who the hell the Dodgers were, and my mom and dad didn't know anything about me. They grew up in a Polish neighborhood, and my dad was a butcher, and their family didn't follow sports. You know, they were big on card playing. They loved playing poker, but came to sports. None of that was big in my family. Even though my mother's side of the family, I learned, this is the Gorski side of the family, my mother's side of the family, there was athletes in that side of the family. There was a couple pitchers in where I lived that were Gorskis. But at the time, families had difficulties. They had vendettas against each other. Oh, I didn't speak to so-and-so because such and such was a pain in the neck, and all this crap. So a lot of the relatives I didn't know, but they had the same name. I didn't have it, but my mom had the same name, and they were relatives of my mother. And the Gorski, there was a very famous player out in the West Coast, Central, somewhere out in the Midwest. I can't remember the name. It was not Gorski. It was another name that I have listed somewhere that became a major league ball player, and became another one was a big superstar football player, and they were Gorskis. So the blood for baseball and sports came from my mother's side of the family. Nobody on my father's side of the family were athletic. A couple of them maybe played high school football, but they were part-time, and they never did anything with it, never went to college with it or anything. So for some reason, we moved into a neighborhood that had an open park, actually an open field across the street from us. And it was sort of like, there was no houses on 3 sides. You had a street on 3 sides. And on one side you had houses, but it was big. So you were able to put a ball field on it. So we had all the kids in the neighborhood would play ball, and baseball or football, touch football, or we'd have a basketball court on part of it or something. And so everything was sports, and we always did something. And I was a nut on sports as a kid. My mother would say, "Why don't you get a piano or a violin or something to learn something good instead of playing these damn ball games?" My mom says everything is ball, ball, ball. I can still remember her talking about it. But it helped me as a person because it helped my self-confidence. When I learned I could throw the ball like a cannon, and I could field the ball like nobody else could in the neighborhood. It was really something for me to be proud of. I was really something because everybody looked at me like, hell, he can do a lot of things I can't do. So I was like, I enjoyed that camaraderie with playing ball. So I started, we didn't have Little League. There was no such thing as Little League. There was only American Legion ball at high school or college or something. So I made my own baseball teams.
It's kind of like the Sandlot movie.
It was a Sandlot thing. We'd make bases out of rocks, and home plate was out of wood. We would make jerseys out of T-shirts, and we would use stencil and put the name of the team on the front with oxblood shoe polish. I mean, we did a lot of innovative things as kids. I mean, in the wintertime, we would play baseball with dice. We'd make leagues with dice. We'd make teams with dice. And we'd have ball players, we'd pick the major league ball players, and you would have the A's, and this one would have the Phillies, and we would play 2 was a home run, 12 was a triple, 2 threes was a single. We had that whole thing, and the rest was outs or whatever. So we had Major League Baseball and dice. I mean, everything was sports, and it was stupid, but that's what we did. And
sounds like fun.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. It was a time when the Second World War was just getting over. My brother-in-law at the time was in the service at the end of the Second World War. A lot of people in my neighborhood were in the war. I can still remember as a young kid, I guess I was maybe 13, 10, 12, something like that when the war ended. I grew up in 33, war ended in 45. I can remember seeing neighborhoods where people had plaques in the window, and the plaque was a gold star on a hanging showing that their son was killed in action.
Oh, wow.
And then they had a blue star showing that he was alive and he was in the military. So everybody in the neighborhood who had somebody in the military had a star in the window, either a blue star or a gold star. And were proud that their kids were in the military during the war. And that was all, I understand, all over the country. It wasn't just here. I think if you check with people back at that time, that was the way it was. And I can remember, we used to have ration. You could only buy gas. You had some kind of book. You could only buy so many gallons a week. You could only buy certain foods. Certain foods were not available because it was being shipped to the military. It's a whole different time at that time. I was just a kid.
Now, was it the same in the Korean War?
No.
It changed.
It changed because this was a world war.
Mm.
Korean War was only through a few countries.
Mm-hmm.
And I have stories on the Korean War. One of my roommates in college, not in college, but in baseball, he ended up joining the military when he was in his 30s. And he was gung-ho Marine. And he became a captain in the Marine Corps. And this Doug Camilli I was telling you about, and this fella, Zot Sasek, and I roomed together. And we played together in 2 different years, even though we didn't room together. We were on the same team. He came in after college, and halfway into the season. I was there for the whole season. And we became friendly, and the following year we roomed together for a short time. But we became friends, and we communicated afterward. And I still remember I was married. I lived in New Jersey. We were playing bridge on a Saturday night, and I get a call on the phone at like 8 o'clock at night. Pick it up. Hey, Walt. No, he called me Zebra. Hey, Zebra. This is Zot. Who? Zot Sasek. Oh my God, Zot Sasek. And this is like 10 years afterward. And he says, I was just with Doug Camilli, and he was a bullpen coach. Or Ted Williams was the manager of the team at Washington Senators, and he was the bullpen coach or maybe he was a bullpen player. Maybe he was a player at the time. He was backup catcher for the Washington Senators. He was one of the Washington Senators. Evidently, Zott ended up in the Marine base down in Quantico, which was close to Washington, D.C. So he contacted Camille, and of course they got together, they had dinner, and they got tickets for the ball game. They got talking about me, because I went down to see him. Doug and I became friends down in Washington, D.C. I did business down in Washington about every 3 or 4 months. I'd go down and visit him when I was down there and spend some time with him. I met his wife, and his kids were real little at the time. And so we had a friendship between the three of us. And I would come down, and I would go visit him at the base, at the Marine base, and he was training the officers to go overseas to fight in the Vietnam War. And at that time, helicopters were a major part of the offense. And you would have a squadron of military on the plane, and they would land and then go out and kill a whole bunch of people and go back to the plane and go back again. Because they would have bases, areas that were like living accommodations for the enemy that would house themselves. And he was teaching the guys how to fly helicopters. And he was a captain at the time. It was a very interesting guy to meet playing minor league baseball. I mean, he was a very interesting man. And I have his papers all here because he died in the Vietnam War. He was killed during the Vietnam War. And I have I had a letter from him 2 weeks before he died. I have a letter from him. Wow. And he received a letter from me before, and he couldn't find it. Well, let me see, he found it, but he couldn't read it because it was in his satchel, and things were so bad, he couldn't read a letter. Oh. But he went to an area where it was bivouacked, and he was sitting on his equipment and stuff, and he was opening the letter, and they got bombed with grenades and stuff, and they had to run into a foxhole and hide, and he came back and he said, my gear and everything were blown up, and he says, your letter was blown up. He says, write me another letter. I mean, I'm getting a letter from the guy from the Vietnam War, for Christ's sake. And for some reason we liked each other, and we communicated with each other, even though he lived in, I don't know, Missouri or some godforsaken place. And I didn't know him outside of playing ball and meeting him in these. We liked each other, and we got together, and we enjoyed our company, and it was fun to have a friend like that.